Welcome back to Face the Nation. We're joined now by congressional correspondent Scott McFarland. Scott, it's good to have you here at the table. These will be prime time programming hearings on Thursday. What do we expect to hear?
The committee has promised what they call previously unseen material, and we have seen a lot. Like a lot of Capitol riot video. So it raises the prospect they're going to show us some of their material. According to our reporting, recordings were made or recordings were requested of some of the top-level witnesses who met with this January 6th committee. We may hear or see some of that, and it's worth reminding people of the range of interviews. Ivanka Trump, Jared Kushner, Rudy Giuliani, and some of the rank-and-file rioters. Watch out for this. We know some of the defendants in the criminal case have gone before this committee, mentioned they've gone before the committee to seek leniency. They have voices that could be heard during these hearings, either on tape or live in person.
So some of this will be produced on tape. You know, we've heard from members like Congressman Jamie Raskin promises to blow the roof off the House. Are expectations being set too high here?
It's unclear who's going to be in the House looking at the roof. The committee has a series of hearings, likely all of them this month in June, as America is busy with summer. Also, who are the persuadables? Who has an open mind and is willing to listen and perhaps change their mind based on whatever's being shown by this committee? Or are people's ideas too baked in? And one other thing, Margaret, the Republicans who have defied this committee, the 5 Republicans subpoenaed who've not come in to speak, and the Republicans who've criticized the committee outside, have not paid a political price for doing so. In fact, Margaret, they may be better positioned for their primaries or general elections because of it. That has weakened a bit of the foundation.
Scott, I know you'll be busy this week and in the weeks ahead. Thank you for coming in this Sunday. We're going to go now to California Democratic Congressman Adam Schiff. He joins us from Los Angeles. Mr. Chairman, good morning to you.
Good morning.
You wear a lot of hats, but I want to ask you about the January 6th committee that you serve on. The Justice Department, as you know, on Friday decided not to prosecute the former Chief of Staff, Mark Meadows, or Social Media Director Dan Scavino for refusing to cooperate with your committee. I know the committee said that was puzzling. Is it your understanding that these men are immune from all prosecution?
No, they're not, and it is very puzzling why these 2 witnesses would be treated differently than the 2 that the Justice Department is prosecuting. There is no absolute immunity. These witnesses have very relevant testimony to offer in terms of what went into the violence of January 6th, the propagation of the big lie, and the idea that witnesses could simply fail to show up. And when the statute requires the Justice Department to present those cases to the grand jury, they don't, is deeply troubling. We hope to get more insight from the Justice Department, but it's I think, a grave disappointment and could impede our work if other witnesses think they can likewise refuse to show up with impunity.
Is it because these 2 men had such close proximity to President Trump? Is the executive privilege argument actually applying here?
That shouldn't be the explanation here, because, of course, there are a great many things these witnesses can testify with no even plausible claim of executive privilege. They were both involved in campaign matters. They both have documents that they could offer. None of this is protected by privilege. And the idea that you can simply refuse to show up rather than show up and say, as to this question, I'm going to exert a privilege, that just invites others to be in contempt of Congress or be in contempt of judges around the country in other courtrooms, and I think it's a very dangerous precedent to set.
New York Times was first to report. CBS has confirmed that Mike Pence's Chief of Staff, Mark Short, actually warned the Secret Service and the lead agent protecting the vice president the day before January 6th that he thought the president would turn on the vice president and that it would pose a direct security risk. We know Mr. Short plans to testify himself before your committee. Is that sufficient? Do you need to hear from the vice president?
Margaret, we're not commenting on specific witnesses, so I can't confirm or deny who will appear before us. I can say that certainly one of the themes that we will be fleshing out is the fact that in advance of the 6th, that there was an understanding of the propensity for violence that day, of the participation of white nationalist groups, of the effect that the continued propagation of this big lie to rile up the country and rile up the president's base was likely to lead to violence. So you will see that theme among the narratives that will be exhibited during these hearings. But as to a particular witness, I really can't comment.
But if you don't deliver a bombshell on Thursday, don't you run the risk of losing the public's attention here?
Our goal is to present the narrative of what happened in this country, how close we came to losing our democracy, what led to that violent attack on the 6th. The American people, I think, know a great deal already. They've seen a number of bombshells already. There's a great deal they haven't seen. But perhaps most important is the public hasn't seen it woven together, how one thing led to another, how one line of effort to overturn the election led to another and ultimately led to terrible violence, the first non-peaceful transfer of power in our history. So we want to tell that comprehensive narrative, and we're aiming at people, an audience, frankly, that still has an open mind about these facts.
Yeah.
We want to counter the continuing propagation of big lies, and that's what our goal is.
I want to ask you about inflation, which is a problem throughout the country. The San Francisco Fed said that the American Rescue Plan contributed about 3 percentage points to inflation. It's not the primary driver, but a contributor to it. In hindsight, do you think Democrats should have structured that $2 trillion package differently? Should it have been smaller?
No, I don't think so. And of course, there have been other studies that have reached the opposite conclusion, that it had an even more minimal impact on inflation.
It's a non-political
What I
group,
do think
you
is
know
the
that.
cause, and well, no, I understand that. But again, there are studies that show that it had a negligible impact on inflation as well that are also very credible. I think the reality is, though, and this I think is borne out by all the evidence, is there was a global inflationary pressure, a global problem with supply chains. Our economy, in fact, grew so fast in the United States that problem is particularly acute because the demand when we emerged, so quickly from the pandemic and grew so many jobs, the disparity between that demand and the supply was so pronounced as to lead to this inflation. But people are suffering from it. We've got to attack it in every way we can. I think, sadly, the Republicans are getting in our way because they would rather have the issue of inflation than really do something about it to help the country. And this is what we're confronting in Congress and what the administration is battling against.
Well, the administration seems to also be making some foreign policy decisions that keep inflation in mind as well. We know the president is preparing to travel to Saudi Arabia this summer, and he'll meet with the royal family, including potentially Mohammed bin Salman, the crown prince, who U.S. intelligence said issued that order to kill or capture a U.S.-based writer named Jamal Khashoggi. This is what you said in February of 2021.
I think he should be shunned. I think he should be, I don't think the president should talk with him. I don't think the president should see him.
Should the president still go to Saudi Arabia and meet with the crown prince?
In my view, no. I wouldn't go. I wouldn't shake his hand. This is someone who butchered an American resident, cut him up into pieces in the most terrible and premeditated way. And until Saudi Arabia makes a radical change in terms of its human rights, I wouldn't want anything to do with him. Now, I understand the degree to which Saudi Arabia controls oil prices. I think that's a compelling argument for us to wean ourselves off of reliance on foreign oil and on oil more globally, so we don't have despots and murderers calling the shots. But no, I wouldn't go, and if I had to go to the country for some other reason, I wouldn't meet with the crown prince. I think he should be shunned.
So there is no way to justify a trip like this if it is an attempt to get Saudi Arabia to put more oil on the market and lower gas prices.
Well, in my view, we should make every effort to lower oil prices, but going hat in hand to someone who's murdered an American resident would not be on my list. And I would want to see Saudi Arabia lower their oil prices, or increase their production, rather. I'd want to see them make changes in their human rights record. I want to see them hold people accountable that were involved in that murder and in the torture of other detainees before I would extend that kind of dignity to Saudi Arabia or its leadership.
Chairman Schiff, thank you for your time today. We'll be right back. We're joined now by University of Michigan professor Betsy Stevenson. She previously served as the Department of Labor's chief economist under former President Obama, and she is in Ann Arbor this morning. Betsy, welcome to Face the Nation.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here.
We have seen more people return to the workforce. We saw that in the jobs number that we just got. The participation rate is back to almost where we were before the pandemic. But you've pointed out there are still problems in childcare, in nursing, in some of those caregiving roles. What does that signify to you?
Yeah, I think it's important to realize when we take a look at the labor market that we haven't seen all the jobs come back in services. We've definitely seen the jobs come back in the goods producing sector, in the service sector, in healthcare and education, and particularly caregiving. We haven't seen everyone get hired back. Maybe because people are slow to go back to wanting to consume those services, and it may be that it's just hard to find people to take those jobs right now.
I want to ask you, this is all these dots connect, but on the specific issue of inflation and risks to the economy. JP Morgan's Jamie Dimon said a few days ago, the hurricane is right out there down the road coming our way. We don't know if it's a minor one or Superstorm Sandy. You've got to brace yourself. So what should consumers be preparing for?
Well, honestly, what everybody wants consumers to do is slow their roll a little bit on spending. And that would actually bring some of the pressure on prices down. And so, the Fed's raising rates, hoping that consumers will spend a little bit less. All the, accusations around how much did the stimulus spending contributes really about, did we give people too much money in their pockets? They're in some of the best financial shape they've ever been. And the result is that demand is outstripping supply a little bit. So if people were to pull back voluntarily, then the Fed actually has less work to do. So I think that message of, brace yourself, it's great. It's sort of what we need to do. But the reality is that we don't have to stop job growth in order to stop inflation. We might end up accidentally stopping job growth, pushing ourselves into a recession, but it's not a fait accompli. We do not have to do that. What we need to do is get demand down a little bit while supply can continue to grow.
Just to go back on what you just said there in terms of fiscal spending, that's some of the congressional money that was thrown at the problem, the emergency spending. Do you think that all of this should have been structured differently, whether it was President Trump or President Biden? Should they be sending checks to people at home, or was that really the main flaw in the deal they pushed through?
I think that there's a little bit of a glass half empty, glass half full perspective here. I mean, we had unemployment at 6.4% when they started designing the American Rescue Plan. And most people predicted that it was going to play out a lot like 2008. 2008, it took 8 years to get unemployment below 4%. The Congressional Budget Office thought it was going to take 6 years to get unemployment below 4%. That was going to take till 2026. So, of course, the idea was, let's make sure that we're supporting businesses, that we're supporting families so that we can have the fastest economic recovery we've ever had. We accomplished that, and we added 7.3 million jobs since that American Rescue Plan passed. The problem was, things went even faster than expected. So, we can look back and say, could we have done the same thing with a little bit less spending? Maybe, or maybe not. Maybe we'd be in a situation right now with 5% unemployment, with millions of people who are in jobs today would still be sitting on the sidelines. Mm-hmm. And that's a situation that I think nobody wanted. We wanted to get back to where we were before as quickly as possible. And it's absolutely clear that the fast action that Congress took every single time from the beginning of the pandemic to the American Rescue Plan is why we've had the fast recovery that we have right now. And we just saw in the labor report yesterday that there are more opportunities than Americans have ever had before to find the job that's going to work for them.
Right.
They're getting hired at incredibly high rates. And what we've seen for the bottom part of the income distribution is household incomes are up nearly 12%, even when we adjust for inflation. So when you ask me, should we not have done that? I think we absolutely should have. For most families, they're better off and they know it What we're scared about is
Well,
we see prices rising and we want to know how long this good time can last.
And that's my question to you, because the Fed can act really quickly here to try to cool things off, but they can't stop the war in Ukraine. They can't stop COVID. Should consumers be prepared that high prices are just going to be with us for the foreseeable future?
Well, I think what we want, I don't think we should think high prices are going to be here for the foreseeable future. I do think the Fed's going to take some action. I think they're going to bring prices. They're going to bring the inflation rate down, not prices, but they will bring the inflation rate down. But they're not going to be able to change those relative prices. So gas is still going to be expensive relative to other things until we end this war in Ukraine. I mean, look, the price of gas is up $1.50 a gallon since Putin started amassing troops at the border. The Fed can't undo that, but what it can do is reduce the rate of price increases on average. But I still think you should be thinking about, is it a good time to get a fuel efficient car or buy that electric bicycle?
All right, Betsy Stevenson, thank you for your analysis. We'll be back in a moment. We go now to Dr. Walter Koroshetz, director of the National Institute of Neurological Disorders and Stroke at the National Institutes of Health. He's also the co-chair of the NIH's Long COVID Initiative and joins us from the NIH campus in Bethesda. COVID survivors often suffer some kind of symptom for weeks, if not months afterwards. How do we know that this is attributable to COVID and not caused by something else?
The vast numbers of people who are affected, the fact that the symptoms occurred with the infection and in many cases persist after the infection, it's that temporal relationship that really goes to causality. There are some unusual features though. Some people get better and then they develop the symptoms back again. It's a little less clear.
And what are the symptoms? Because I've read such a broad array, from brain fog to people having difficulty getting lung capacity back. Senator Tim Kaine talked about feeling like he had Alka-Seltzer bubbles on his skin.
Sure.
What is a symptom of long COVID?
The great difficulty is the fact that the heterogeneity of the symptoms is quite vast. But I think there are some characteristics that make it very unusual. People develop usually more than one symptom. There's usually a cluster of symptoms, and they are falling into certain categories. So there are neurologic troubles, like you mentioned, trouble concentrating, sleeping, sometimes peripheral nerve trouble, that sense of the bubbling on your skin. Some people have pulmonary difficulties with continued sense of shortness of breath and a cough. Some people have cardiovascular trouble, a lot of trouble with exercise intolerance. Fatigue is just pretty much with most of the people have trouble. There's digestive tract trouble as well. And people tend to have, a couple here and a couple there, but they are all seemingly tied to having had their COVID infection.
So the NIH Recover study was launched in February 2021. You've got about $1 billion or more funding the research you're doing. What have you found in that study, and when will your results be made public?
We have upwards around 4,000 people already enrolled, which makes it the largest in-person study of the post-COVID situation. And right now we're collecting data on the different symptoms. We want to understand the underlying biology that's causing this trouble. This is not a new problem exactly, because there are other infections in the past that have led to similar symptom clusters in people after infection. We've never been able to figure that out. This is our chance, I think, to delve deep and to try and understand what is going on in the biologic recovery and the people who don't make a good recovery.
So at this point, some of the studies that have been done suggest that 60% of long COVID patients are female, that neurological symptoms can persist for about 15 months or more. The CDC says COVID survivors have twice the risk for developing a pulmonary embolism or respiratory conditions. 1 in 5 has a condition that could be due to COVID. Are all of those things consistent with what you are seeing right now?
I think so. This is a significant problem for the country going forward. What we don't know is how long it will last. We don't know what the long-term effects, a decade now from what COVID has done to our health in the country. It looks as though right now there's also an increased chance of developing diabetes after COVID. We don't know about heart disease, dementia, all the other diseases that naturally occur either. But that's kind of what we have to get at the bottom of.
How is it that we are 2 years or more into this pandemic and we know so little? And do we at least know that there are treatments for long COVID?
We don't have like a magic bullet, a cure for long COVID, because we don't understand what's driving it biologically. And so to get that, holy grail, we need to understand what is wrong in the body that's causing these symptoms, clusters of symptoms in people. And for the other infections that have occurred in the past, we've never been able to figure that out. So there's people with post-infectious mononucleosis, people with post-Lyme, they've been suffering the same things. There's a condition called myalgic encephalomyelitis, chronic fatigue syndrome, that looks almost identical to what we're seeing. And these have existed for decades. We've never been able to figure them out. And yet people should have hope, because from what we've seen so far, people after COVID, even months after, still are getting better. So it's kind of targeting the symptoms and targeting the underlying biology, the two main avenues we're going after.
And for someone who's listening to you right now and they think they might have long COVID, what would you advise them to do when they see their doctor?
Just being forthright with your physician and telling him what your problems are is the first step, and not being afraid of it. The knowledge about this condition is spreading like wildfire across the country, so it's not a brand new thing anymore. It's called the post-COVID condition. So it's actually getting out into the general medical practice now.
Doctor, thank you for your research. We will track it, and we know the effects of this pandemic will be with us for some time in many different ways. We will be right back. That's it for us today. Thank you all for watching. Be sure to tune in to our primetime coverage of the January 6th investigation hearings. That's Thursday night at 8 p.m. Eastern on our broadcast or streaming network. Until next week, for Face the Nation, I'm Margaret Brennan.